This is Fan Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Owens. And I want to thank you for being on the show today. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Phantom. How about you?
I'm doing great, and it's just fun to talk to people from all over the world. And it's great for you to. This is the first time we've been talking to you here, and
Yeah.
it's always fun to just do this as a live process. But before we get into the heart of the interview, I always ask guests a couple of standard questions. What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Um, there's stuff inside me as there is inside everybody. There are books, movies, deals to be made, things to be done. And I just think that with anybody who feels that way, there's this need to get it out there. I have an opinion. I have a lot to say. I have things that I want to do. Some of them are crazy.
Mhm.
But I like to write books. I like to write film scripts. I like to raise money for independent films. I like every now and again to write things that challenge me or about things that I don't know about. I I tend to shy away from um, things that cause brain rot. I don't stare at television a lot, and I don't scroll on social
Doom
media a
no
lot.
doom scrolling, no doom scrolling.
Yeah, just no doom scrolling and no sort of staring at things because I'm not challenged by stuff like that. So I do what I do because I have a lot to say and I love it, to quote the A team, I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah, that's
I love scoping something out and saying I like to do this thing and then you do it and it's like, damn, that was wow. That was hard. That was cool. Um I I do it because I do it. I
yeah.
think anybody like yourself and other creative people, I think they just do things because they don't have any choice. They're driven to do it.
Well, I feel like I talk to a lot of creators, film directors, musicians, painters, actors,
Yeah,
and what I find in the creative, community, every musician I've ever dealt with, it still plays, right? And I'm 57.
right,
We play because we love it. And the opportunities just happens like so a lot of times people don't even think about, we have to think about business, but we don't like to. I'd rather if
right,
somebody says go show up on the stage and play, it's like, oh, I'll work the contract out later because they just like
right.
actually playing, right? Yeah, like, actually just work it. And so we've gotten caught in that and maybe not having the best business sense sometimes because of that. But we're in it because we love the form.
Well,
And
people have a hard time understand. Like people say to me, "Why don't you retire?" And I said, "Well, because I don't know how. I don't know how. I've gotten up every morning of my life and I've gone someplace and I've done something. And a lot of times people don't understand with creative people like yourself. You can't not play. It's not possible for you because that music wants to come out
yeah.
and you have to do it. It was funny the way I got into the music business was um, I had wanted to be a musician and I play drums, I play guitar. I don't play any of them well, but I play a lot of different, piano and keyboards and drums
Mhm.
and those kind of things. And I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be an artist in the music business. I learned pretty quickly that I'd probably starve to death before I was 20.
Mhm.
But I was always the guy who did the contract with the club owner, or I was always the guy who got the posters printed. Or
Oh
I was
yeah,
the marketing guy. I was the
marketing
business
guy,
guy. So,
business
so it
guy.
was a normal transaction for me and transition for me to move from being the player to being the manager or the promotion guy or the marketing guy or the sponsorship guy. So I never had that regret that a lot of creative people have that they weren't successful at their job and they had to take a step back
Mhm.
and be something else in business. Well, I like the business piece
Well, you found
because
your
I
wheelhouse. Yeah, you
I
found what
did,
you
yeah,
yeah, because sometimes that's the problem is, people don't actually find out where they should be. Sometimes they get pigeonholed or kinda society tells them to be in the box and
yeah.
that maybe that's supposed to be but it's not satisfying. So when you find something that's satisfying and speaks to you, that's a rare thing that people actually find the thing that speaks to them because a lot of times people do out of obligation, out of, just norms, and they just don't follow their heart. They go with what, is expected of.
I was able to do the thing, whether it was helping to sign them to a label or helping them to cut deals with the record label or whatever, to do concert tours or those kind of things, to bring some great music to the people and help it get bigger and better and better. Um, and so I always felt that my purpose was to do the business piece that brought the great music to people. But
So
I never felt like for example, like I say, I write books, I write movies, I do things like that. I never felt that being a business guy in music stifled my creativity,
mhm.
because I was still able to sit down and write a book, you
Yeah,
know.
well, you're still
And
being creative because
yeah, so it
you
didn't stop me from being creative. So I was never I never felt that regret or that let
well, you
down that
you
yeah, I
still
couldn't
had
do it
that
on my own.
energy as a writer. Like, you're a
Right.
writer, and you found out maybe you weren't a songwriter, but you're a writer that could write a book, like, and not like,
Yeah.
you could write, and that's still being in the creative space, and you're around, like the Rolling Stones, David Bowie, and Paul Simon, so you worked with those groups on, like, the contractual business side? Is that what you were
Yeah.
doing?
So what I did for the tours was, I helped put the shows on sale, like control all the marketing, make sure all the concert promoters were doing the marketing they were supposed to, using the approved advertising materials, including the sponsors in everything, getting the shows put on sale, getting the tickets put on sale the way that we had wanted them to be put on sale, the way that our research told us that we would sell the maximum number of tickets in the minimum amount of time, and work directly with the promoters. I worked with the public relations people. So I wasn't the PR guy that set up the interviews, but I was involved in that. I did the broadcast deals. So the syndicated radio broadcast, concert broadcast, the
Oh,
pay-per-view broadcasts, any broadcast of the concert. I did the sponsor deals. I've done $400 million worth of corporate sponsorship deals. Rolling Stones, David Bowie, $250,000 with one concert promoter, the big concert promoter in Canada. So I was always the liaison between the band and the promoters. I was the liaison between the band and the sponsorships, and I put the sponsorships together. In my record company days, when I worked with record labels, I was the guy that went to the radio station and got the records played on the radio
oh,
stations.
so they gotta talk
Um,
to the DJs, or got the DJ to
Talked
spin
to
it?
the program directors and got the DJs to spin it. It was funny though, when I started out, I was really young, in sort of my late teens, and I worked for a small independent record label that became a huge independent record label in Philadelphia. It was Philadelphia International Records, and they had the OJs, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, and all that.
Mm,
Well, back in those days, because I'm 100 years old, back in those days, a lot of the places out in Pennsylvania, Wilkesboro and Scranton and places like that, and we're real happy to see a black man show up at the radio station.
oh, yeah.
So
I
I
see
was the
that.
white kid bringing the black records to the radio
Oh,
stations.
so you're able to kinda make the deal. So you're able to
I
get
was I was the guy who the guys at the radio station in Wilkesboro, Pennsylvania, were a little more comfortable with than somebody from the label. So I really a varied kind of thing, from doing record promotion stuff, the concert stuff. I loved. I loved working with concerts. I managed a Canadian rock band called Triumph
Oh, no, I know
for
who they are.
several years.
Yeah,
Well, they
Triumph's
actually
they're
record
unsung heroes. I mean, a lot of people like love them, but they're
great
kinda
band.
not known like Zepp or not
Yeah,
known like the rest, but I know who they are.
and you talked about earlier. You said that I might not have been a great songwriter, but I was a book writer. The cool thing about Triumph was that they actually recorded one of my songs. There was
Oh,
a song called "World of Fantasy"
cool.
that the guitar player Rick Emmett heard me playing in the studio one afternoon, and so they recorded us. That was like the coolest thing
They
in
give
the
you writing
world that
credit?
ever
They
happened.
they
Gave
actually
me a
gave you
writing
writing.
credit. No, it was
Oh,
awesome.
that's
They gave me a
awesome.
writing credit and everything.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so you know, it was the business side. It was, and the sponsorship side was always very unique because you'd be dealing with the brand, um, Coca-Cola, Budweiser, American
Yeah.
Express, whatever. You'd be dealing with their creative people, and I'd be dealing with rock and roll, and I had one foot in each camp, and it was really interesting because some of the ideas that these brands came up with, well, we'll get the band to dress in pickle suits and
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
we'll get
I
a
can
big
see
sandwich. I'm like, oh
Madison
God,
Avenue guys is like, oh, maybe they're not in tune with
oh
what's hip.
no. It was sometimes it was the worst. And trying to explain to sponsors that being blatant with your stuff, they Rolling Stones, classic example. They had big banners that they wanted to hang on the speaker columns of
Mhm.
like a can of beer and a bottle of beer. I said, don't do it.
Yeah, I'm not
They
gonna be into that.
People are okay, and people are okay, a lot more okay with sponsorship now than they were then.
Yeah,
People are okay with sponsorship so long as you don't stick it in your face.
yeah. If it's
Like,
not,
don't yeah, don't make it so blatant. Like, be subtle, and that way it lets me as the promoter say, "Well, that lets us do more concerts, and we can do a bigger production because Budweiser is providing. We can make the tickets cheaper.
Mhm.
Give them all these positives. But if you stick a giant beer can in their face, no,
Yeah, you put a
not
inflatable
going to work.
beer can on stage. I don't think they'll be into
Don't need inflatable beer cans. No inflatable beer cans. Because the problem is a band like the Rolling Stones, somebody will have a knife, somebody will stab it.
yeah,
And then
no,
that's not going to end well.
no, it's like I don't think he's gonna be into that, but,
Not so yeah, Keith is not going to be down with the big beer can.
it's interesting, I think, because of your creative, like, vibe, you know, and I'm always into this idea of frequency and this connectedness,
No, I'm with you there.
but
Yep.
that, like, if you have a creative vibe, like, you had that sensibility, you knew that that's not gonna work, right? You're a creative person, you know what's like what feels authentic and maybe what doesn't feel authentic, and, these guys who are maybe in advertising and what they can sell on the soap opera is not what they can sell with the rock band, and
No,
so
and you just nailed it. That word authentic. And that's the whole idea that I have. And the most recent book is The Rockstar Real Estate Agent. And it's basically about talking to real estate agents and saying, look, you need to specialize in something. You need to have a jam. So whether it's beachfront property, whether it's luxury homes, whether it's, condos, investment properties, whatever it is, you need to find a thing and make it yours and become the best at it as you can. And but it needs to be the authentic you. And take a guy like Springsteen, for example. So
Mhm.
Springsteen never set out to to be anything or to do anything. He just did what came out of him. And his first couple of albums, the record label Columbia actually thought he was going to be Bob Dylan
Yeah, they thought
because
he was.
yeah, they thought because they, the songs were very poetic and the images were great and all that
Yeah,
kind
they're
of
in
stuff.
that
And
space.
then
It was a
right,
Dylan-esque space.
right, and then Clarence Clemens shows up, and but his version of rock and roll was unique to him, but it didn't stop there. And I always say, look, nobody would confuse Bruce Springsteen with Metallica. Nobody's going to confuse Metallica with Aerosmith, and nobody's going to confuse Aerosmith with Justin Bieber. Like they have found their
Their
lane,
signature. Yeah,
their
with Dylan,
signature.
yeah, I mean, Springsteen's signature is like he's a storyteller,
That's right.
and he found a way to kind of create these, a lot of people think these things are coming like they're like I've read that they're he's a good writer. He
Right.
came up with a lot of these characters, kind of like me and Dylan in a way. I mean, he creates characters that are kind of what he pulls
I mean,
from the
Bruce Springsteen, you're like the magic rat. I mean, come on, man.
yeah.
And
He just pulls
he's
these characters out.
but what's interesting about him, though, when you talk about the authenticity piece, which again, you absolutely nailed it. And if you're a real estate agent and you decide that, I mean, for example, a friend of mine wrote the foreword to the book, and she's all about mid-century modern, 50s and 60s ranch houses. Great, really cool stuff. And so if you're into that kind of stuff, that's your jam. You're
Mhm.
going to hang out with people who like that. You're going to know where those people are. So it makes it easier for you because it's your authentic self. It makes it easier for you to do that piece of real estate. But with Springsteen, even though he was doing well, and in his autobiography, he talks about it, right around the time of the River album, he said, I still felt kind of empty. I felt like there was a piece missing. And that's where he came up with the idea that his music really helped people understand the difference between the American dream and the American reality.
Mhm.
And so
That
many
that
of his
that
fans,
I like.
blue collar guys, steel workers, people who worked with their hands, and women who got out and they were there every day, and they were teachers and nurses and those kind of things. And everybody had this idealized version of the American dream. You get the house, you get married, you get a nice job, you get a gold watch at the end of 25 years. But that's not the reality. That is not the American reality. So he said it felt more genuine to him to be able to write songs that he knew made people enjoy themselves and have a good time and dance, but at the same time to say, I'm with you.
Yeah,
And I mean,
and
look at him now. Look
yeah,
at
and
the
he does have
statements that he's
a
making.
little bit of a subtext in him because they
You bet.
have they on its face, born in the USA, that song in its face might appear to be some kind of anthem, but when you
Right.
actually deconstruct it and look at what's going on, it's not
Right.
as obvious. It's like that's what I like about good writers and good writers like Dylan and Springsteen and Lou Reed. They have subtext, they have depth to their work, and so when
Oh
you go
boy.
into their work, some person might only hear the chant of the refrain
Right.
of the but other people who dive into it, they get the result of their listening skills.
Well, Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA and John Fogerty's Fortunate Son are the same song. And basically it's, everybody, and it always cracks me up to see the sort of real crazy sort of patriot thing because everybody go, Born in USA. Dude, you ever listen to that
Did you ever
song?
really listen to it? He's the
And
long young
that
daddy
song
of the
about?
USA. He's coming back from
Right.
Vietnam, and he's like not feeling so like happy about it, right?
Not
He's
feeling
not
so gung
feeling.
ho and not, yeah.
Yeah, he's actually coming back, and the dream has gone sour, which is kind of like his thing. Like in the river, he's like he talks about the thing that was supposed to happen, or the
Right.
kids who had the hot rods and they were racing, and then suddenly they get married, and now it's like, oh, it's not so. This relationship is not what it was, and
Yeah.
he kind of talks about the shine coming off.
That's it.
The people actually living with the reality, like you said.
And I think so much of thoughtful music, thoughtful books, thoughtful music thoughtful moves goes down that road where it looks one way, but it's really
The other way,
not
yeah,
so much that. And there's a lot of that in rock and roll. I mean, there's a lot of lyrics and things. And you're right. A lot of times people miss it
yeah,
because
because
they
people just
they
hear
hear the
what
chorus.
they wanna hear. People listen to Freddie Mercury, and Queen, and they get this one vision. It's like, what is that really about, right? You know, and it's like people listen to a song like REM. It's one of their
Right.
biggest songs. Everybody say it's a love song, and then Michael Stipe's like, "That's not really a love song."
That's not a love song.
You know?
Well, I was talking to somebody about Another One Bites the Dust. And Another One Bites the Dust, and they're singing a song. I said, that's about a mass shooter, right?
Yeah,
And they're like,
people
say, say what now?
they don't fully get the depth of, and that's been the
Right.
kind of trick of a subtext of a great author or writer is, you can get to be popular and maybe a lot of people actually misinterpreted it
Well, if
and
you're a
they like it.
writer,
But it's like,
if you're
well,
a writer, you're going to write about things that matter and mean something. Um, but it was always, the thing that struck me, and it's the reason why I ended up writing the Rockstar Real Estate Agent book. And when I talk to people about the whole music industry thing and artist thing, um, they are who they are. And the ones that have lasted are, for example, to go back to Springsteen again, the people who saw him at the Stone Pony in New Jersey are people who they've stuck with him for 25 years,
yeah, they never dropped them.
more than
Like,
that, almost 50 years. And they're the ones who've been buying the records and buying the t-shirts and going to the concerts. And you go to anybody at a stadium show for Bruce Springsteen who's over 50, and they got all the records.
they got
But I think,
everything. Yeah.
yeah, but the ones that lasted, the ones that um, never veered off, they never got scared off by the trends in the business. They weren't trend followers. If the music shifted, I mean, I knew that Russia's manager and sort of knew the guys in the band a little bit, little tiny bit, but I knew their manager pretty well. and they agonized over New World Man, because they feared that it was too much of a departure away from who they were. And New World Man and Tom Sawyer are different kind of songs, but in the same ways, and some of them made horrific decisions. I mean, U2 blew it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just horrible. And the same way with Aerosmith. Aerosmith decided it would be a good idea to rap. What?
Yeah. Well,
nobody,
some people
nobody
don't,
wants you to.
yeah, they don't
Nobody
realize,
wants you
like,
to rap.
yeah, I mean, your core fans, have certain expectations, and you have like
Yeah,
guys who like Bowie. Bowie could shift, and he
yeah,
could go, and he might do something that's not that commercial. Because like the Berlin stuff is really good, but it wasn't as commercial as Ziggy. It
right.
wasn't as commercial as what he did with Let's Dance. But he would go and shift. Like sometimes he needed to shift. And it wasn't always about like there was going to be the biggest hit he ever had. It's more like I need to do this as an artist, and then I'll go back to something after. I mean, some artists can do that. Bowie was good at doing that.
And it's
Yeah.
every artist has a niche, and the niche is so specific to them that even even two people who you would think that people would say, nah, that's the same or it's a ripoff, Madonna and Lady Gaga.
Yeah, it's not the same.
They're exactly the same and wildly different. I
Yeah.
mean, if you sort of describe them, young girl, great music, very sexualized sort of presentation, things like that. That's Madonna. But I could be describing Lady Gaga. But
Yeah.
they are. Nobody's ever going to confuse the two, and certainly never. Nobody's ever going to confuse Lady Gaga and Dolly Parton.
No.
But I think the artists find a niche. They own the niche. It's theirs. And for example, you mentioned David Bowie. David Bowie's niche was change.
Yeah. So he's
He
able
was
to
a
live in that.
shapeshifter. He was a
He's able to
chameleon.
live in
So
that.
nobody. Whereas with a normal rock band, U2, Aerosmith, whoever, they're they're going to be doing very much the same version, like Stephen King, who keeps writing the same book over and over again and just changing the characters. Writes great books, but there's a formula, there's a Stephen Kingness
Yeah.
about him as a
It's kind
writer,
of
and it's the same thing. And in the case of U2, with Zeropa, right? That was the one who
like,
was a little weird before
oh,
Octo
yeah, it
Baby.
went electronic.
Um,
Yeah, the
yeah,
guy.
and the fans, they'll give you one, right? They'll say, "All right, we're not crazy about it. Don't do that again," and and you'll get a pass for like an album. But it's interesting too. The mindset. I think one of the greatest marketers in history is Gene Simmons from Kiss.
Oh yeah, they're good
Absolutely
market.
brilliant marketing guy. And one of the things you hear a lot from real estate agents is there's so much time between transactions with people who buy a house, and it could be 4 or 5 years before they buy another one.
Hmm.
So it's really hard to stay in touch with somebody for that long. And I said, well, what, don't you have any friends? But Gene Simmons talked about it, and he said, look, we put an album out, we book a tour, we go on the road, we've got 3 hit records, so we have to stay on the road. Then we come off the road, then we detox, then we write the material, then we go into studio. So it could be 5 years before a band puts out their next album. So what did they do in the meantime? Everything that they do is consistent with their niche. They do a walk on roll in a movie. They, they're never going to be a country band, but maybe they do a duet with Blake Shelton on an
Hmm.
album. It's like Jagger did Don Henley. Don Henley has on that album that he did. I can't remember the name of it, but he's got a bunch of different guests on it. But it's very much kind of a Sweet Virginia kind of song that Henley did.
Hmm.
I think it's something Rose, Wild Rose, something. But Jagger's singing the background vocals, and so they do things like that. And that's I say to real estate agents again, because that's the most recent book. But when I work with people, I say, look, you have to figure out valuable ways that you can maintain your relationship with people while not compromising your niche. So if you say, I'm going to do mid-century modern houses, I'm going to do luxury houses, you can't just do everything. You've got to stay in your lane. And if somebody comes along and says, if you sell luxury houses and somebody comes along and says, well, I'd really like to buy a horse farm, give it to the guy that does horse farms. Please, God, don't try to sell a horse farm to somebody if you've never been on a horse farm. And that goes for whatever kind of sales stuff you do, whether it's making movies, whether it's making music. The one thing that rock stars get, they know who they are and they know how to stay in their lane. They know when they're going off, and so it was something. It was a lesson that I learned. And when you think about how hard it is, I mean, I hate American Idol to the core of my being. There's nothing that I hate more than that. I'm good with horrible, terrible things that people have done, but I'm not good with American Idol. And I don't like the fact that they turned the music business into a game show.
Yeah,
because people sweat blood to be successful in music. And, I don't want Simon Cowell going, oh, well, I am.
Arbiter,
but it's just the worst. But the thing is that musicians spend so much time and energy doing what they're doing, and trying to make it the best they can. Steve Martin, the comedian, put it better than anybody I've ever heard. And I heard this years ago when he said it. Somebody asked him at a event or something like that, how do you become successful? And the movie business is almost as bad as the music business. I mean, it's horrible. And cocktail parties and sucking up to people and trying to get this part or that part and auditions and all those kind of things. And he didn't like that. Steve Martin didn't like that kind of thing. He didn't like the cocktail party circuit and all those things. He sort of did it the best he could, but it wasn't great. And he said, the way you become successful is to be so good they can't ignore you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about that for rock bands, it's exactly what they do. They figure out who they are. And I always refer to it as passion, people, and purpose. You've got to be passionate about something. You've got to give the people what they want, and you have to have a reason to do it. And if you've got those three pieces and you're so good, as much as people may not like this or that band, they can't deny the fact that they're hugely talented. Not everybody liked Fred Durst, but he was successful because he did well.
When you think of like the Hendrixes, the Jim Morrisons, you get. I like to see the evolution, but like my good story is kind of like if you look at fusion modal jazz, right? You look at like Miles Davis and Coltrane, and these are people who evolved like over time. It was like their whole sauce is like Weather Report, that type of thing. Right? Herbie Hancock. These musicians evolved over time. They didn't just keep on doing the same formula. They moved into different genres. They go from bebop to modal jazz to fusion to electronic. And so they brought their audiences as they grew. Because they were like their whole thing was like these are expert musicians. And so they can move into that zone. Again, like Hendrix, you go from Ari Experience to Electric Lady. Right. It's like a super jump. It's like, going from Sgt. Pepper's, going from the first Beatle album, like Help, to like Sgt. Pepper's Abbey Road, White Album. They're not in the same lane. People.
Well, and they bring the fans along, especially Coltrane and guys like that. I mean, they would educate the bands or fans, and they'd uplift them a little bit, and they'd bring them along because as much as they were doing something different, they were still themselves. They were still their authentic selves. It's like, I don't know if you've seen the Dylan biopic when he showed up at the Newport Festival with an electric guitar. People in the audience were yelling "traitor."
Yeah, Judas. Like when he went to did that in England, they yelled Judas, and he said, "I don't believe you." you know,
And
that was
but
his
you know what?
response. You know, he just kept
What's
on going.
interesting too is when and in the Rockstar book, I I talk about how bands. I'm getting excited about this. I'm sitting up straight and everything. When when bands make a decision to make the next album, they're always looking to bring something new to the table, but they always have to be careful because it can't be too new and it can't be too far, or you get Zooropa, or you get things where the fans are going, you want to look up. But the Beach
You know, getting
Boys,
like an Exile on Main Street. Like Exile on Main Street is an evolution of the Stones
right,
style and actually pulling in, what is they call the country rock influence they got
right.
getting pulled in from the Birds and pulled in
And
from
it was the time, exactly right. It was that music was around. And so they're thinking, how do I Rolling Stoneify this thing?
yeah,
I
I
want to
agree.
bring something new. But it's also something as simple as when the Beach Boys used a theremin on Good Vibrations.
Oh
And
yeah.
all of a sudden you got that, woo, that
Yeah, Pet Sounds.
something
The Pet
brand
Sounds
new.
is so weird because Pet Sounds was kind of like a little too far for the Beach Boys, and it didn't actually sell as well, but it
Right.
was sometimes you can have a critical success that becomes, like,
Brilliant.
iconic.
One of my favorite albums.
Yeah, Pet Sounds on the marketplace, it didn't do that well
No,
compared
but
to the
but
beach songs.
Peter Frampton with the voice effect and what was help me with it now.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
you know what I'm talking about? The
Yeah,
air
kind of
water
a
bag
vocoder.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an early vocoder, but not a vocoder.
Right. So all of those things, bands are always looking for, can I like Paul Simon bringing in,
Yeah, South
sort
Africans.
of third South African music. They always want to bring something new to the table that will bring the audience along and educate them a little bit and help them understand, this and this and this. Whereas the same, by the same token, back in the radio days, back in the top 40 radio days, what they were looking for was a sound.
Mhm.
They just wanted certain sounds on the radio. And I remember there was a girl singer. Oh God. Well,
Like the
at some
Motown
point, I'm gonna.
sound, the stack sound, they people wanted a certain
No,
style.
this was. She sounded like Heart,
Oh, like Heart,
and
right, yeah.
yeah,
So
she
she
sounded
wanted
like
to
Heart, and there were lots and lots of Heart records on the radio. And then suddenly Hart wasn't making any records. And so this girl, whose name I will remember, put out a record and hugely successful because it sounded just like Hart.
Heart, and the Heart had
And
wasn't on the stage, so she was able to take advantage of
let
the
me let me tell you sort of a funny sideline story. This was is a weird wake up call for me. I wrote a book way back in 1993 called Welcome to the Jungle.
mhm.
And Welcome to the Jungle was kind of a handbook for garage bands. And it was basically how, and HarperCollins, major publisher published it, HarperCollins published it, traveled across the country. I was on radio stations doing interviews. And instead of doing the book signings at bookstores, we did them at like guitar stores.
Oh, wow, guitar
And
centers
oh, it
and
was a
stuff.
blast. Had a great time. And basically it told garage bands, this is how you get to the A&R guy, and this is how you get recorded. This is what a PR thing does. It was like 300-page book about how to be a rock
I
star.
could do it, yeah.
So a couple years or so ago, I guess, I'm looking on eBay, and suddenly this book written about the music industry and released in 1993 is selling for $50
Wow.
on eBay. And I'm like, all right, so the music business looks nothing like it did in
Yeah,
1993.
yeah, it's not the same.
Everything is different. It is not the same business at all. Who in their right mind would buy this book? So I had a couple copies. So I threw them up on eBay, and I said, I sold them for like $20 or something. And I said, okay, come and buy the book. So the one guy contacted me and he said, can I buy the book? I said, sure. I said, let me ask you a question. Why in the world are you buying a
Way a bunch of
30-year-old or 40-year-old book? And he said, it's a history book.
Oh, he wants to
I
know about
said,
that.
I'm sorry, what? He said, it's a history book. And he said, you and he explained to me, he said, look, when you wrote that book, top 40 radio made hits with singles.
Mm-hmm.
FM rock radio like WMMR in Cleveland and WMMS in Philadelphia and KLOS in LA, they were the mega radio stations for FM rock.
Mm-hmm.
Gigantic record stores like Tower Records is where you bought your records. Promotion guys, like payola promotion guys, independent promotion guys, they were getting records played on the radio. Record companies were huge, monolithic, controlled the business, huge concert promoters, and it was the epitome. And he said to me, it was the Roman Empire era of the music business. He said, and what we use it for now is to show students, this is how we got where we are. Mm-hmm. This is what it was. It was as big and monolithic, and that very thing is what prompted all of the democratization and all of the changes. How do we fight back against the giant record companies? Do we really want to do this way? And then along comes MTV and video and all those kind of changes. And I said, really? I wrote a history book? That makes me feel really old. Thank you so much for that.
And that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, the democratization of the music, the existence of the DAW, the digital audio workstation, the Pro Tools,
yep.
The ability that you could, initially hip hop people took advantage of the tech. The hip hop artists took advantage of like the drum machines, the 808s, the 909s, the MPCs. But then people started realizing, if I get a DAW, I can record without going to Olympia, right? I can actually record with my audio interfaces of a rock band. If I can mic my rock, and I don't have to pay for the studio time, right?
People can make hit sounds in their bedroom.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in one right now.
Right, literally. I mean, you can make Sergeant Pepper in your bedroom.
I got all my Junos and my Moogs and my multi-tracks and all my effect boards, and I just invested in the ability that I can just throw something onto SoundCloud, throw it onto YouTube, and get, I just got a royalty check today. On CD Baby, it's not big. It sold like 70,000 spins, make $35. But the fact that 70,000 people were listening is cool to me. It's not
fantastic
big numbers, but the fact that you can get more than just your friend to listen, and you can get, you can work with people, and you could live doing what you love. And I have multiple hats, so I can kind of just do what I want, but I can actually express myself and put out full projects and not be gatekeeped. And so that just gives me the freedom to just go where I want to go. And, you put things out in the ether and people come to you. And so now we have a world where it made is oversaturation, but people like-minded people tend to find each other. And then
and that's
by putting things out.
And you hit it, because like-minded people get to find each other. What is that? That's a niche. And so, you've got new bands creating new niches that people can follow, because every new band that comes along basically creates a niche. And I do presentations and stuff for real estate agents, and sort of go and talk to them about this. And they always say, well, what kind of houses did you sell? And I said, well, no. a niche doesn't have to be a kind of house. A niche can be anything. It can be your unique approach to what you do. So I owned a small real estate company in North Carolina for a while, and I went out and actually sold houses. I sold about $50 million worth of houses for a little while. And so what I did is I would meet with somebody and say, look, I have no idea what color your kitchen should be. I have no clue what shiplap is. I don't know anything about decor at all. So if you're looking for an interior decorator, however, I know everything about money. So when we talk about houses, I'm going to tell you that house is going to appreciate 1%. That house is going to appreciate 4%. This house is going to be an area that 2 years from now is going to be a commercial zone, and a muffler shop is going to offer you 3 times what you paid for it to tear it down and build a muffler shop. So my niche was money.
Hmm.
And so I would tell them, these are the properties that you want to buy that are going to deliver maximum return for you
Like an
financially.
investment, like you're more like a Wall Street type of guy, you know?
I was more
You're
like a Wall
choosing
Street guy.
and moving it like you're treating it as an investment rather than this is like, the decorum of the day.
But what was interesting was that my customers, my niche, were people that were either financially oriented, engineers, scientists, so people who were numbers oriented or data oriented,
And they can
as
understand it.
opposed to you know people who, well, oh, isn't this beautiful? Or it's, I mean, I say to people,
Aesthetic
I don't care.
oriented. Yeah, to get the
Yeah,
aesthetic
I
oriented
don't care.
person versus like the person who wants to treat it as an investment.
I don't care about your kids. I don't care about your yard. I don't care about any of that kind of stuff. Only everything that is part of the house, insofar as how it's valuable. And it all goes back to that niche concept. It all goes back to when I wanted to talk to people about real estate. I knew that the people that I should be talking to are not the people who are watching real estate shows on television. I need to be talking to people who watch Bloomberg.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so it, you
CNBC
know,
or something.
made my life dramatically easier because I knew where to fish. You fish where the fish are,
You gotta know
and
who your audience is, like, it's like,
got to know who
being
your
an
audience
artist.
is.
Yeah,
Right.
you gotta know, like, your whole wheelhouse. It's like, where are you gonna li how are you gonna, operate? And if you don't have a good, can't if you can't read the room, like a comic that goes on
Exactly.
stage, they're
Exactly
gonna
right.
bomb they're not gonna bomb because they're aware. But they could bomb, but they're gonna course correct, so you're not gonna remember to bomb, right? Because 'Cause they're gonna
Yeah.
course correct so fast that you'll forget about that.
Or they're going to bomb and tell themselves afterward that everything was fine, just so they don't jump off a bridge and they can do tonight tomorrow night. But no, I think rock stars, musicians, sort of in general, um, are very dialed into that. They're very attuned to, because none of them. I mean, I I try to explain to people in business who say they take care of their customers, they give good customer service. Believe me when I tell you, nobody in any business takes better care of their customers than rock stars. They love their fans and they would never do anything. And they're really careful. And you see a rock star do something stupid, and it ends up on video and on social media. They smack a paparazzi guy or something like that for taking pictures of their kids. They course correct really quickly because no rock band can afford to alienate their fans.
Yeah.
They just can't do it. And so I always talk about the fact that if you want to find a group of people that are very niche oriented, very concerned about authenticity, never want to go too far, and take very good care of their customers, that's a rock band. Um, I think some of the stuff. I mean, the financial model of the record business has just collapsed. It's the reason why bands only make money from touring now. And if you go back to the day, bands made money from their records.
Yeah.
They had 12 tracks on there. They made money when records got played on the radio with performing rights. They made money from their T-shirt sales. They made money from their concert ticket sales. But what happened was the record companies became multinational corporations. So whereas once upon a time you could get your record royalties, you could also get tour support money from your record company. You could also get an advance on your t-shirts before you went on tour, because they were all separate companies.
Mm.
So the t-shirt company was different from the record company, which was different from so you
Yeah.
had all of these revenue
Different
streams
stories.
coming
Yeah.
in. Then suddenly along comes Sony and says, all right, we're going to sign you to the recording contract, the t-shirt contract, so now you don't have three different revenue streams. You got one, and it's your
Mhm.
record company. And what they're doing now is cross collateralized, which is a horrible phrase. What they're doing now is they're paying themselves back for making your record. They're paying themselves back for any money they give you on the tour support thing. So they're going to say, okay, we'll give you money to pay the expenses of your tour. So you go out and open for Aerosmith, or you go out and you open for Foo Fighters or whatever. So we're going to offset the deficit that you have to spend to do that. Well, once upon a time, that was okay. You got your advance from the record company to make the record, and you have to pay that back, which a lot of people don't know. And now you don't really have that royalty stream anymore. They give you money to tour, which they kind of do now, but they took that back from the record company or from the record royalties. But the t-shirt company was separate.
Yeah.
So you still had your t-shirt money. Well, now if the record company is the t-shirt company, so now they're taking their t-shirt money back too. So
yeah, that's why a lot of indie bands, don't sign with labels and they do their own
right.
t-shirts. They do
Because you
their
make
own
more
merch.
money.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
they
with a lot
literally
of independent bands or independent arts, there aren't actually rock bands, and independent artists, they're like not on the labels.
well, it took
Because
us 100 years to actually make more money selling your record out of the back of your Chevy
yeah, well, I mean,
than selling at a record store.
they're doing small batch vinyl, small batch tapes,
You bet.
t-shirts, posters, merch, and and then licensing deals.
It's
They
listen.
go. Yeah,
It's not all that different than indie publishing on Amazon for a writer. Thousands of books come out every day, and like 11 of them actually make any money, but they take a huge chunk. So you'll sell a book for $10 and the writer will get 3.
yeah.
So it's cheaper for me to buy a bunch of books from them for $3 and take them out and sell them for 10 out of the trunk of my
Best
Jeep.
idea really is if you do the small batch vinyl, you do 100 vinyls, you sell them for $30, you can make $10 on each vinyl or more.
Right.
And so bands at a small micro level could do 1,000 vinyls and make more money than their Spotify brings in all year. Right.
Exactly. And
They sell 10,000 and they make even more, and then they actually can afford to tour because they can actually run and they don't have to be hitting 3 million or 5 million or 100,000, 100 million streams to make any money. They can actually make money at a smaller scale.
Right. But I mean, back in the day, Clive Davis, who ran Arista Records, called Steve Jobs a pirate. When iTunes
music.
came along. Turns out he was right. I mean, because bands were making a lot of money and digital was just another revenue stream. When digital took over as the only revenue stream, then you got Spotify. And as you said, 70,000 spins will make you $35.
$35. Yeah, that's why you got to sell the vinyl. Because if you sell the vinyl and I sell 1,000 vinyls and I get $10, $15, you see how much more money you make.
That's right.
It's like, so, if you do a small tour, hitting Boston, New York, Philadelphia, you hit these small clubs and you have a merch table and you sell that, you'll actually make money. And you won't owe the record company, for your Econoline van that you rented.
That's right. But
yourself.
everything niches down, and that's why the slogan for, let me make sure I get it right. The Rockstar Real Estate Agents, Rockstar Riches, Real Estate Niches, and so that's what the thing I try to make sort of clear to everybody is that the way that you make money is by having a lane, staying in it, and leveraging that lane with all the opportunities that you have. So to your point, which is a really good one, if you have a fan base based on what it is you do that's unique to a certain group of people in music, they're going to buy vinyl. In the same way as, I try to explain to real estate guys, look, if you get what they call a listing appointment and you're going to go to somebody and you're going to talk to them about selling their house, well, you go in and you say, well, hey, I'm Joe and I sell houses and I've done this and I've sold that many. And when I do it this way, blah, 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 blah. Whereas my friend Angela, who specializes in mid-century modern, the mid-century modern person who's selling their house have heard of her. And she comes in and all she has to say at the listing presentation is, so how can I help you? Because she comes in pre-sold.
Pre-sold,
So
yeah.
she has nothing to prove. when she walks in the door.
Yeah, you're
And
building a reputation. You're building like that whole that you can leverage.
and you can't build a reputation if you're a jack of all trades. And I always say, look, here's the thing. Bruce Springsteen, Metallica, Lady Gaga, whoever it is, they can fill an arena or a stadium with their music and their people anytime they want. The band that can play everything, disco, polka, country, whatever, they're playing at the Anderson wedding at the country club this weekend.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's it. If you're a jack of all trades,
master of none. I mean, that's just the typical thing. 'Cause, like if you get that niche, and your wheelhouse could be your Sun Ra.
right?
Sun Ra was a very experimental jazz outfit.
Yeah,
Now they're kind of known as the Velvet Underground of jazz. Now
right,
they're looked at the same level, but they had that niche from the 50s to the like 80s, and
right.
they built it up, and now their heirs are getting the benefits of their labor because they created a sound, they created an identity. So if you create one of these kind of intellectual properties of your identity, like Lou Reed did it, like with the Velvets, like the Velvets were ahead of their time in '66. Only artists and producers understood who they are,
Right.
but Bowie got into them, and by the time Lou went and did Walk on the Wild Side, he helped them put that out. And
Right.
suddenly there was a synergy where what was cool in '66 was suddenly cool in the mid '70s. It's like what happened with Dylan when he went electric. And when he went electric in '66, people didn't get it. By the same style of music in '74, '75, '76 is that filling stadiums.
No,
So
Vincent
sometimes,
Van Gogh.
yeah,
Vincent Van Gogh died broke.
yeah, sometimes you're a little ahead of the curve,
Yeah.
but if you stick with it, the people will get on the train.
Well, and like I said a couple minutes ago, that when you're a rock band and you create your band, you create Bruce Springsteen or you create Lady Gaga, your fan base may be 11 people, and eventually it turns into millions. When Gaga started out, her record label wanted her to be just your typical pop singer,
Mhm.
and she said, "I don't think so." And she already knew the Little Monsters were out there.
Yeah,
She
the make
knew her fan base was out there, and it was so much more than making cute little poppy, auto-tuned records. And she
she had
stuck
to
to her
create that
guns.
stagecraft like a Bowie. She became like
Right.
this idea that you can do that kind of as a woman, you can do that Bowie kind of reinvention and
But
the
that's not
stagecraft, you
but
know?
that's not easy.
Well,
I
it's hard to
mean,
do.
the so all the bands that we've never heard of are the ones who caved in.
Mhm.
They're the ones who abandoned their niche of who they
Yeah,
are.
yeah,
They caved and they said, "Okay, well, we'll take the money." And there were some bands that sort of half caved. But if you stick to your guns, if you know who you are, and I think at the very beginning of when we started the conversation, when I said you can't not play your music,
yeah,
you have to play the music because it's in there to have to get out. I can't not write books because that's
yeah, you gotta
that's
have
my
your
sort of creative
niche.
passion. And I think that if you really believe in who you are and what you do, you
Right, you can
you
see that with
can't,
Rush. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
you can't look at yourself in the
Geddy
mirror if
Lee
you've
was
given up.
he would like they looked at his voice, they listened to his voice, and people couldn't really get his voice. At the beginning, people
Right.
had a hard time with Geddy Lee's voice, but he
Yep.
stuck with it and kept on perfecting its range. And it was and Geddy Lee's voice in rock is a unique voice.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like anybody else. So once they were able to like, hey, well, I'm not going to try to get rid of it. I'm going to perfect it. I'm going to double down on it. And they knew it wasn't the typical rock voice, but he eventually, because he stuck in, put the time in, it started to have dividends. And so
Right.
sometimes, like you said, you got to invest. It's like instead of trying to revamp his voice to be like Robert Plant or something, he didn't do that. He
No.
invested on and say, hey, we're going to go all in.
And I lived in Toronto for sort of the early days of a lot of those bands. I mean, I saw Rush in bars,
Mm,
and when they were like Rush's fan base was 300 people,
Yeah, it was very
Um,
small.
and you know, I was in a club in Calgary, no, Edmonton, Alberta, in Canada, and the club owner said, "Hey, I got this new band that I'm working with here locally. You want to check them out?" I said, "Sure." And so I went out back, and he said they're in a warehouse rehearsing. So I go back and I watch them, and they're playing whatever. And I said, "What's your name?" And the lead singer says, "Oh yeah, I'm Mike Reno. It's Loverboy."
Loverboy, oh yeah, I know them.
Yeah, and like practicing, not even a band yet. And I went back to I was working at CBS Records, Columbia Records at the time, and I went back to them and I said, "You really need to hear this band. These guys are great. They're a pop band, but they rock."
Yeah, pop
And
rock. Yeah, they were good at
but
that.
the and but it was a little bit of what do we do with them? And sort of that trying to push them in a direction because they were a poppy band, but they did rock. So they weren't Aerosmith, but they weren't the Monkees. It's like
No, more like a
some
power pop band, kind
right.
of like,
So, but again, they created a niche of that, and then you see when the new niche is created, you see all the imitators come along.
oh yeah, with Duran
You
Duran,
know,
Wave, how many bands were imitating Duran Duran? They were kind of like the prototypical. They got the video. They actually have videos. They're little movies. They're kind of like the archetype of the new wave. I mean, even though Joy Division really is the archetype of the new wave, they actually were more successful than Joy
right? And
Division. The
all
new
the
one,
'80s hair bands,
yeah, yeah.
like all the '80s hair bands. I mean, every
Everybody
one of
else
them.
was Duran Duran.
The Quiet Riots, and I mean everybody just. And that was the interesting thing about working with Triumph, because they could have very easily slipped into that hairband thing, into that glam rock thing, and
Ramping,
started wearing a whole bunch of glittery
or like
spandex and things like that.
Rat and Poison and
Yeah,
Quiet
and
Riot
they and
and all that.
and I mean, but they had Fight the Good Fight and Magic Power and all these different kind of power ballady things with Rick Emmett with a vocal range that was, I don't know, 8 octaves or something. He was insane, but they never did. They said, "Look, this is what we do, and this is how we look, and we're nice Canadian boys who could live next door from you," and they stuck to their guns, and as a result, I think 2 years ago at the Toronto Film Festival, there was a documentary about them that
Yeah, yeah,
premiered at the film
they're like
festival
kinda like the Velvet Underground or like those type of
of
bands.
those kind of bands, yeah, and they stuck to their guns. So I think anything, whatever I would say to like a new band or a new uh, filmmaker or whatever, is like, be who you are. Like,
Yeah.
don't try to be somebody else. You can certainly emulate somebody. Like, if you're a film director and you want to direct movies like Wes Anderson, knock yourself out.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm actually executive producing a movie right now called Paralysis, which is a horror movie, scary ass movie. And Jacob Harding is the director. He's this new young director. He's kind of got like an M. Night Shyamalan vibe.
Oh,
Is
yeah, that kind of vibe.
these really kind of creepy, off-putting movies, and he's going to be huge. He's going to be a
Oh,
huge
that's cool.
director,
I'm a big fan of the John Carpenter. I'm a child of the '70s, so, I mean, I saw all those Carpenter films,
right?
so I kinda like that, but, like, I like the idea of when people, do a horror film that actually has some intelligence to it.
I'll never. I'm terrified. I'm an absolute wuss when it comes to horror movies, but it's actually a good premise. A young kid's family dies by drowning. He's the only one that's left, and then 15 years go by, and suddenly he develops sleep paralysis. But when he wakes up in the morning and he can't move or do anything else like that, this creature called the Ma Da, which is the Vietnam